In this video, I'm going to be talking about the empirical rule. The empirical rule applies only to data sets in which the shape is considered bell-shaped. What does the empirical rule tell us? It's going to aid us in interpreting our standard deviation. So again, if we know, and this has to be true, that our distribution is approximately bell-shaped, then the empirical rule states three things. The first one, that about 68% of all data values fall within one standard deviation of the mean, that about 95% of all values fall within two standard deviations of the mean, and lastly, about 99.7% of all data values fall within three standard deviations of the mean. So sometimes you actually will see this referred to as the 68, 95, 99.7 rule, also called the empirical rule. So I've drawn a little picture that I think helps illustrate this. If you notice, I have an approximate bell-shaped curve here. Right in the middle, I have my mean, and then I've walked out one standard deviation in both directions, two standard deviations, and then three standard deviations in both directions. And so you can see within one standard deviation on either side of the mean, we have 68%. Within two standard deviations, we have 95%. And again, within three standard deviations, we have 99.7%. So one hint that I'm going to give us when we look at this example is to go ahead and take the time to fill out the corresponding values down there on the number line, and that should make answering your questions pretty easy. So let's take a look at that example. The first example says the life of electric bulbs have a bell-shaped distribution with a mean of 1570 hours and a standard deviation of 120 hours. What percentage of bulbs have a life between 1450 and 1690 hours? And then we'll come back and answer what percentage of bulbs have a life between 1210 and 1930 hours. So as I mentioned, I actually like to take the time to fill out this graph right here that we have. And I'm just going to go ahead and use the one that's already up here. So notice my mean is 1570. So I'm going to go ahead and label that. And then I'm actually going to do all the calculations. So my standard deviation is 120. 1570 plus 120 is 1690. 1570 plus 2 times 120 is 1810. And then lastly on this side, 1570 plus 3 times 120 gives me 1930. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So if I take 1570 and subtract 120, I get 1450. If I take 1570 and subtract 2 times 120, I get 1330. And then lastly, if I take 1570 and subtract 3 times 120, I get 1210. And so I can see I have all my values here, and this should be relatively easy just to read off the correct answers here. So first question, what percentage of bulbs have a life between 1450 and 1690? Here's 1450. Here's 1690, and if you notice, they are both one standard deviation from the mean. So either from this picture or from the actual statement of the rule, within one standard deviation of the mean, the answer is about 68%. So my first answer, very simply, 68%. Similarly, let me look at the next one. My values are 1210 and 1930. So here's 1210, here's 1930, and again, in either case, I can tell I am 3 standard deviations from the mean in both directions. And so either from the picture or from this statement, within 3 standard deviations, about 99.7% of all values fall. So my answer for the second one, 99.7%. So again, the empirical rule can only be used if you have an approximately bell-shaped distribution. There are 3 statements. Within 1 standard deviation is 68%, 2 standard deviations is 95%, and 3 standard deviations is 99.7%. I like to go ahead and fill it out and then just read off the values like we did with this example. So take the time to do this, and it'll make answering these questions very easy and quick.